Hello, I'm Larry Hatch, Safety Manager for Halverson Company. This recorded presentation is from a company-wide safety meeting where we had safety training for aerial lifts, scissor lifts, crane baskets, and man baskets. Another word we introduce in this training is MEWP or Mewp. This stands for Mobile Elevated Work Platform. What all of these machines or platforms have in common is that the worker will be working from heights using one of these elevated platforms. As you know, this can be very dangerous work. The purpose of this training is to instruct the worker about the hazards of this type of work and what they should do to work safely in these situations. While we go through quite a bit of material in this training, you may still have questions or want some clarification on specific points. After participating in this training, if you have any questions or comments, please speak with your supervisor or your safety manager. Let's get started. Okay, we need to talk about elevating or hoisting personnel, the different ways that we do that. We've had some inquiries about this and some things that have happened that make it clear that we're not 100% sure on what we're supposed to be doing with this. So let's try to clear some of this up, provide a little bit more training on hoisting, how we can hoist ourselves and hoist personnel. And to do this, I'm going to go back to this famous incident. It's a famous accident that happened. This was called Big Blue. This was in Wisconsin at Miller Park, which was Milwaukee Brewers Stadium. And they had this great big roof that they needed to put into place, and they were swinging these pieces of the roof into place using this big crane. That big crawler crane that you can see on the ground there was nicknamed Big Blue. And they've been doing a lot of work on it. You can see that, this is one of the final pieces and one of the biggest pieces that they had to swing over into place. And notice all the other cranes around. So there was a lot of crane work and a lot of iron work going on to build this stadium. This is what ended up happening. There was some problems with the ground, some stability issues. There was some mechanical problems with Big Blue, and there was a little bit of wind. There may have been some problems, a little bit of a slant to the a slight degree of angle where the crane was sitting as well. So for various reasons, some of them more important than others, they lost the load. And when the load came down, one of the bad things is that we had on one of these cranes that I showed you earlier, there was a bunch of cranes. On one of these cranes, there's a man basket under it, and there was three iron workers in this crane basket. And when this came down, it took out that crane itself, and there was a lot of injuries, a lot of property damage, and unfortunately some deaths involved in this. So this was a really bad crane collapse, and I wanted to bring this up first to help highlight the hazards that we have and how hazardous the work that we do is. And we need to always be careful. We always need to be vigilant. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about crane baskets. This little photo here for this equipment task training, this is equipment task training that we have. And this is a suspended man basket that we have here at Halverson Company. This is one we work in conjunction with our engineers and using the ANSI instructions on how to make sure that we're following their rules and keeping people safe. We built this man basket, had it certified, and we can take this to job sites. There's certain things that we have to know as we're using a crane basket. A lot of times we rent crane baskets from the crane company. And so we would hope that when you get those, one of the things you need to do is make sure that those have been inspected. and that they have some kind of certification, because they have to be certified to a certain load rating. So whether you're going to use ours or whether you're renting one of the things that we need to make sure happens is there has to be a proof test and a trial lift prior to each time you set it up in a new location. So say you're going to do several lifts from a certain location. Well, once it gets into that location and you're going to start lifting people with it, then you have to do a proof test and a trial lift there. Now, you don't have to do that each day or each time you lift somebody up, as long as you haven't changed anything, as long as the equipment is the same and it's in the same location. If nothing has changed, then that test is good for that location and that equipment. So we have to make sure that it's tested, it's proof tested to the platform's rated capacity, actually to 25% more than the platform's capacity. So say you've got this little crane basket here that can lift 500 people. You're supposed to do a proof test or a trial lift with 500 pounds plus 25% of that, so 625 pounds in that basket, placed equally on the floor there, distributed equally on the floor of the man basket. Certain things that have to happen with that proof test. You have to suspend the load. You have to actually just go through the motions of what you would do with the people. So before you put people in it, you put some weight in it. The crane operator lifts it up. He goes through it, makes sure that he knows where they're going to go. So he runs the arc. He traces the arc that he's going to do during the real lift. He makes sure that it's going to work out the way that we want to, and he double checks all of his loads. And then he has to hold it in place for a minimum of 5 minutes with that load on it. Now, one is called the proof test and one is called the trial lift, but we usually do them in conjunction together. That's why I just kind of been talking about them both together. And this has to be done prior to lifting personnel in that basket. So you can either call it your trial lift or your proof test. We want them both to be done the same. They can be done concurrently. Okay. There has to be a competent person there, and that is going to be our competent person, a foreman probably, or someone that the foreman directs to do this. He's going to look and just make sure that the safety devices are in place and functioning properly. So what are some of the safety devices? Well, you've got to have, there's usually probably the first thing to start with, some kind of a door on the man basket, make sure that it closes correctly and locks. You can see that there is a secondary connector here, this cable right here. That's an emergency cable. If for some reason this man basket with these cables here were to come loose from that hook, there's a secondary cable attached above the ball. So that's some of the safety devices that you're going to look at. One of the other things that he has to do is make sure that whoever is going to be inside the crane basket have their proper PPE. So all of that is types of safety devices. He has to ensure that while the trial lift is going on, that nothing interferes with the equipment or the personnel platform in the course of that trial lift. So he has to be there during that lift and watch it all the way through and make sure that it is going to work according to the plan. He has to just double check what the rated capacity of this platform is and make sure that we don't exceed 50% of that equipment's rated capacity. So this is any time during the lift. So even though we check it for 125% of its capacity, OSHA still says the capacity of that, we want a 2+ safety rating on that. So the capacity on that needs to be 200% of what we think will actually lift. So anyway, I told you that it could be, that may say it was 500 pounds. That means that we're really only going to put 250 pounds during that lift. The load radius to be used during the lift has been accurately determined, and he'll determine that in conjunction with the crane operator. Okay. This is the pre-lift meeting that is going on. You can see everybody involved over there. That has to be attended by the equipment operator, so that's the crane operator. Signal person, if we're using a signal person for the lift, oftentimes that might just be the person inside the basket. All employees to be hoisted. Anybody who's going to be in there, and that could include that maybe you're going to have one guy go up in the morning and one guy go up in the afternoon. So just so you don't have to do pre-lift meetings, you can get everybody together in that one meeting, because anybody who goes up in that basket has to be in this meeting. And then also the person who's responsible over the lift, so the lift director, and that's usually our foreman. It will not be the crane operator. If you bring a crane operator in, it won't be the crane operator. Let's put it that way. Any rental cranes that we bring in, they're usually pretty stringent about letting you know that they are not the crane, the lift supervisor. They are just the crane operator. They do what the supervisor says. This relieves them of any responsibilities. Okay, this pre-lift meeting has to be held prior to the trial lift at each new work location. Okay, so again, if you move the crane, get set up in a different position, then you just need to have a quick little meeting again. You need to do your trial lift again, and then you'd have to do a quick little meeting. And then if you have somebody show up one day who wasn't there for the pre-lift meeting on the first day, you're going to have to repeat the meeting again for that person. Okay, let me go back to that. Is there any questions on crane baskets? I didn't go into all of the regulations, but I went into the ones that I thought that we needed to make sure that we needed to touch on. Does anybody have any questions on these or any other comments that they want to bring up about crane baskets? Are you waiting to comment, Daryl, or are you just wanting us to see your pretty face?
Oh, I just wanted you guys to see my pretty face.
I appreciate that.
I don't have anything to add.
Hey, your face was plenty to add. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to forklift. So if you've got a work platform or a man basket that you're attaching to a forklift, some of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing if that were ever to happen. So this again, OSHA puts out the regulations on this. Must be securely attached to the carriage or the forks. So the man basket has to be attached securely. It can't be, just just sitting on the forks. It actually has to be attached to the structure. Usually that's going to be done with some chains. That's most of the time I've seen it done with chains. There have to be guardrails, and if there are not guardrails, then you have to use a personal fall arrest system. You notice that you don't have to have guardrails. The way that OSHA rules it is, or the way they put it in their rules is guardrails and or personal fall protection system. So, take that for what it's worth. If you don't have guardrails, I guess you could still have something. No, I've never seen one of these without guardrails, forklift basket at least. I have seen people using something other than a forklift basket, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, now this is an important one, lower before moving. So what this means is that if you're using a man basket attached to a forklift, that can only be used to raise personnel up and down. So you're lifting them up to the location where they need to do their work, and then you're lowering them back down. And if you need to move to a new location, the workers have to exit the basket, and then the forklift driver can move to the new location. The workers have to get back in and be raised to the new basket. They're not allowed to ride inside the basket. It's only for elevating them and lowering them. Okay, and then of course you need to make sure that you inspect this before use. One other thing about these man baskets themselves, because you see various sizes of these, and I've seen some that were pretty big, pretty wide, and you have to make sure that you stay within 10 inches beyond the wheelbase of the machine that you're using to lift it up. So this is a pretty big machine right here. Look at where those wheels are. And you know, you got, I don't know, what is that, 6 feet across there? So you could have a pretty good sized man basket here. But you can't go beyond 10 inches beyond each of those wheels. So keep that in mind. If you're using just a small man basket, forklift basket, it's not that big a deal. But if you've got a wide one, then you need to make sure that you've got a wide enough machine for it. Okay, this is on a job site. This was a few years ago. First of all, what do you think? What does anybody see anything that they don't like about this photo? Someone unmute yourself and say something you don't like about this photo.
They're standing on the pallet.
Yeah, that's a good one right there, right? They're standing on a pallet. I'm going to bring that into closer view in a minute. Anything else anybody sees?
There's
Standing
a guy
under the
standing
load.
underneath him.
Yeah, both of you at the same time, exactly. Standing underneath the load. You're never allowed to stand under the suspended portion of a forklift. It doesn't even matter if there's people on it or equipment on it or anything. You just can't stand under the suspended portion unless you're doing maintenance on it. The other thing that's interesting to note is that person standing under there, that's actually the operator. So the operator has to be at the controls 100% of the time. There's a few other things that I need to point out about this. Let's talk about the pallet. So there's your pallet that you were talking about. That, you know, we didn't like that. And I agree with you. Here's the other thing that's interesting about the pallet. It's actually secured to the forklift using a piece of twine. This is twine similar to what you'll see wrapped around hay bales. And what do you think? You think that's a good connection? A good way to secure it? And how about the pallet itself? How is that for a platform? Now, OSHA says that you cannot lift anybody on the bare forks of a forklift, that you have to have some kind of a platform. So this is a platform of a type. What I don't like about it is I hope, you know, there's a lot of things we don't like about it, but some of the biggest thing is that it's just not a very good stable platform. With the little holes in it, it'd be easy to lose your balance on there. Your toe slips off, or you get your heel caught in one of these openings. And you just don't want to be in that type of a position when you're up working from heights. You want to have a nice, stable platform as you can. So I think OSHA would probably be okay with this if it was a better platform and if it was securely attached in a better manner. But what else has to happen now, because there's no guardrails? What else do we have to do with this, or with our workers? Yeah, tie off, right? They have to be tied off. And then we had 2 workers up on it. They did have their harness and lanyards on. Here's one of the things I don't like about this. Where do you tie off? You know, it's not a really great place. I'm not sure where they're tied off. I hope they're tied off up here towards the top. You always want to remember when you're tying off, you want to tie off above your head if you can. And if you can't, try to stay as high as you can, as close to above your head as you can get, which in this case would be the top right here, that top rail right there. Okay, this is the other thing that I needed to point out. So they're using a rough terrain, a Type 7 forklift, a rough terrain forklift. And the standard says a rough terrain forklift truck shall not be used to lift people unless there is no other practical option. And so the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because a lot of times there's a practical option. Usually if you can get a rough terrain forklift in there, a lot of times you can get a man basket in there. And so just be aware of that. This is kind of a last option thing that we want to do. It's not the best way to lift people. It's a little bit more hazardous than some other ways. So try to figure the best way that you can to lift people up, and only use this as the last option. I know that if OSHA comes in and says, did you consider other options? You have to tell them what the options were, and they'll be the ones who will decide whether this was your last best option or not. Okay, now I need to talk to you about Mewps, which is a fun name. In 2020, we had a new standard came out, and it was on Mewps. Now, Mewps is what we used to call aerial lifts, but what they now call mobile elevated work platforms. And so we've got kind of some clarification, some new rules and regulations a little bit, but also some clarifications on what we need to be looking for in when we're using aerial lifts. So I had a video here, but they don't come across very well, so I'm just going to skip through that. So the first thing that happened is for manufacturers. There's some changes that manufacturers have to do. Okay, the first thing is they have to have tilt sensing requirements. So you may have been in some lifts before that you get them at a little bit of an angle and they just either won't go up or they won't continue along on the angle, and that's because they have these tilt sensors. That's one tilt sensor. There's other tilt sensors they can have, but that's one of them. And it means that they're not supposed to operate if they're not level. Because of that, we have seen it on a few machines, but it wasn't standard across all manufacturers. It was kind of like some manufacturers did it. Maybe some of the newer models had it. Some had it for certain situations. Well, the new ANSI standard just came out and said, okay, you've got to have them on all machines. If you want to manufacture these are some of the requirements you're going to have. And then they go into what the sensing requirements are, what the sensors have to do, and what the result will be from them if they happen to go off. Okay, they also, in these sensors, one of the things they have to do is to actively monitor the loads. So they have to have load balance and overload sensors. So you may start finding some lifts now that may not work or they may seem sluggish to work for you if your load isn't balanced across the platform. The other thing that could happen is as you are bringing more, maybe you've got the lift up in the air and you bring some more equipment onto it. Maybe you drop something, you drop a spout or a piece of equipment into the man lift with you, and if you overload it, it's going to cause you problems as well at that point. So it's something that you need to be aware of, and that you take that into account when you're using an aerial lift to bring equipment down, kind of using it as a crane. It's interesting because in the standard, it kind of prefaces this by saying that Mewps are not cranes. So I know that we all use them for, we have to be able to lift some equipment material in them, and they have a rating for that. And the manufacturers, from everything that I've read, are good with that. But we do have to make sure that we're staying within the right load limits that we have. Okay, something else that you probably already noticed is that you can't just use a chain across the back now. At your entrance area for your guardrail, they actually have to use gates instead of just chains. Any rough terrain machines, and I think this applies more to scissor lifts than to boom lifts, but they have to have solid or foam-filled tires. Okay, railing height was standardized. Sometimes manufacturers were just putting up whatever railing they wanted to, although most of them I think were at this point. But that is the standard railing height. That's also the standard height that we're going to, well, that's not quite the standard for us, but that's the height that they have to use. And then they had to update their manuals with a lot of the information that's new that has to do with these. Okay, risk assessment. When you first get to the job location, we have to have a log of the job, the location, and the time frame. Most of that is already going to be in some of our documentation. Some of the other things that we have to do, though, is as it pertains to using a lift there, we need to identify the risks and the hazards specifically for lifts. We have to make a list of the authorized workers and maintain a list of authorized workers who are trained. And we have to share that list with their owners or the owner reps as requested. Now, this is an interesting thing is too, each time before you begin the project and start using your lifts, you have to have a rescue plan. And that rescue plan has to include how are you going to get somebody out of a lift that is stuck up in the air. And your rescue plan just might be, throw them up a bottle of water and have them sit there until the rental company can come out and fix it. Okay, that's probably not a very good rescue plan, but that's a rescue plan. A lot of times on a job site, we might have multiple things, multiple ways to lift people up in the air, and we could use that as our rescue plan. But you do have to have some kind of a plan. You have to put some thought into this before you put people up in the air. How are we going to get them down if we need to? How close are emergency services? How close is the rental company if we're wanting to use those? So say you want the fire department to come and bring out their ladder truck and bring someone down from there. How far away is the fire department? Can we do that? Is that feasible? So think about that rescue plan. Okay, training has to be done. Operators, here's some of the things that we have to do is we need to make sure that operators have been certified. And this can be just certified. It can be certified by a third party or it can be certified by your own company. So a competent person has to perform some training and then certify that these people have been trained. And here's who needs to be training. Here's who needs to be trained. Operators, so the person who's going to be in it running it. Supervisors are required to have a certification. This certification can't be just a quick overview. Hey, here's the boom lift here. You'll get this JLG. You'll get an idea of how to use it once you get in it. So I want you to go get in that and get used to it, and then we'll certify you. You actually has to give them some instruction. OSHA says a class. And then you have to have some hands-on experience with it, and someone has to observe you. So right now we're doing the class portion. We're talking about these different things that we need to. But that hands-on portion is going to be very important, as will be the observation. And that's going to be done by competent people in the field. That's how we handle that. And then after that, those things have all happened. We'll go ahead and have a certification for those people who've done it. And that certification has to have an expiration date. Okay, this is kind of interesting. One of the things about training is it says that one of the peoples that's on the ground, somebody else who's on the ground, has to be trained so that they can act as an operator if needed. So I was hoping Miguel would be in here, but I think Miguel told me a story one time about how he was up in a man lift like this, and it got stuck. The controls wouldn't work from up there, and he wasn't able to bring it down. And I've had other people tell me this story. I was just going to use Miguel, but other people have told me this similar stories to this too, that you're stuck up in the man lift and you just can't get down. Well, what do you do about that? Does anybody have any suggestions? If the controls in the man lift don't work, is there anything else you can do?
Use the ground controls to bring the lift down.
All right, thanks, Frank / Wade. Joe, did you have something to say too?
Yeah, I said use the ground controls to bring the lift down.
Okay, great, thank you. That's exactly right. On all of these, this equipment that we're using, they usually have controls in the basket, and then there's controls on the base of the equipment as well. So for that reason, OSHA requires that, somebody on the ground needs to be able to operate those controls, understand how to operate those controls too. So keep that in mind, that you have somebody on the ground, hopefully, who can help out if you do get stuck up in a basket. Okay, OSHA did a 1-year study, and one of these studies they investigated 10 fatalities and 20 preventable injuries. And the fatalities would have been preventable as well. So they had 20 injuries and 10 fatalities that they investigated and went through and said, okay, what were the main causes why people are getting hurt in forklifts or killed? I'm sorry, not forklifts, in mobile elevated work platforms. What are the main causes why people are getting killed or injured? And they came up with 3 of the main causes. The first one they said is inadequate fall protection. They didn't understand what they're supposed to do for fall protection. The second one was stabilization. And then the last one was positioning. So I'm going to go through these a little bit. So the first one, fall protection, because this one is interesting. It's not the same for the 2 lifts. Scissor lifts must have guardrails installed to prevent workers from falling. Your fall protection in scissor lifts, per OSHA regulations, are guardrails. That's your fall protection in a scissor lift. So does anybody have any comment on that? I thought there might be some comments and some confusion on this. What about your fall arrest system? What about a personal fall arrest system? My harness and my lanyard. It doesn't say anything about it there. OSHA's pretty quiet about this, except to say that if the manufacturer states that a harness and lanyard must be worn in that piece of equipment, then you must wear it. So that's kind of the only rule that they have on it. Now, sometimes you'll see, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but even in scissor lifts, sometimes you might see what they'll point out a place on it and call it an anchor point. Just pointing it out and calling it an anchor point isn't sufficient to say that you have to use it, but you may want to. You know, think about best practices. Personally, whenever I'm working from height or whenever you're working from height, I'd like to see you having your harness and your lanyard on. Now, maybe you don't have to even use it while you're in a scissor lift like this because OSHA doesn't require it. But what happens if you need to use the scissor lift to transfer, to go out onto another level? You know, you might need to have that harness and lanyard with you so that you can use it in a certain circumstances. So make sure that you have it. Where I would always wear it in there in the basket, even if OSHA is not requiring it. And you know, if it doesn't create a greater hazard, I would use it. Okay, now we get to the boom lifts. Fall protection, tie off at all times when working from boom lift. So this one's a little bit more clear. You have to do it all the time. And this is something that I wanted to make sure everybody understood because there's been a couple instances of late where we have not had people tied off in boom lifts. And this is very serious. This is something that we've got to make sure is done. You must wear your fall protection. You must be tied off in a boom lift. The fall protection must be rigged such that an employee cannot free fall more than 6 feet. And also so that you cannot contact any lower level. So either one of those, you can't, it's got to be rigged so that you don't fall all the way down to the ground. That's kind of obvious. But it should be rigged so that you don't fall more than 6 feet. So give some consideration to that and give some consideration to what kind of lanyard you would use in a boom lift. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay, let's talk about stabilization. It says ensure that scissor lifts are stable and will not tip over or collapse. And one of the things that you want to look out for, and I think this is with all lifts, not just scissor lifts, but you can see in this photo right here, the reason I include this one is because you see they've got a curb there. There's a hole, there's an opening in the floor, or they're calling it a pothole, but there's an opening in the floor. All of those, if you drop so that opening in the floor, if you drop a wheel down that's going to put you off balance and you might come over on that. So Hitting a curb, going up on a curb, that would do the same thing. Again, that may not be so easy with the scissor lift, but you know, you'll sure feel it if you're up there a long ways and you hit something like that. So watch out for what you're using as your stable base. You know, you have to be careful about where you're using this. This accident happened because they brought the lift too close to the edge. They were kind of up on that cement portion. You can see behind them over next to the building. And there was a slight curb there, and they came down off the curb, and that was enough to offset the stabilization of this lift and bring this lift down. So again, you need to be careful and watchful of what you're going to be driving over. Okay, traffic control is also part of keeping it stable. You need to make sure that there's no other equipment around your lifts. So, you know, cone them off, do what you need to make sure that you don't have a problem with traffic where you're going to be working. This is an interesting one that we don't think about very often, but OSHA specifically talks about this, and it's scissor lift. One of the scissor lift hazards is wind. And they specifically state that in a scissor lift, they do not want you using a scissor lift when the wind reaches or exceeds 28 miles per hour. Kind of an interesting number there. But I think one of the reasons is because what it has to do with is the maximum allowable side force on the platform. So if you've got that lift all the way stretched out there, and then you bring, you know, 200 pounds or more than 200 pounds of pressure exerted on the side of that lift platform, you have the danger that it could potentially fall over. So the general rule with the scissor lift, OSHA also says that just to be safe, it's most stable, and I think we all know this, it's most stable when you lower it to the ground. In fact, they use what they call a 2 times the width of the base rule, that when you're moving a forklift, a scissor lift, they want you to lower it to 2 times the lift of the base. So a 4 foot, you've got a platform with 4 foot width. They want you to lower it down to 8 feet before you move it. But they do tell you that you have to follow the manufacturer's directions on that. So if the manufacturer doesn't say you have to lower it down, if they say you can use it all the way up, then you could probably use it all the way up for OSHA. But again, remember best practices. Remember, you know, it's a lot easier to tilt that or tip that thing sideways, tip it over if you're extended all the way out. So be careful of that. We're not in such a big hurry that you can't lower it down to a safe elevation and then move it around. Okay, let's talk about positioning. This is right from OSHA. You need to correctly position the lift to avoid crushing or electrocution hazards. So the first one is to paying special attention to crushing, which is caught between injuries. So if you are up in the air and you're moving that forklift around, sometimes it's hard to see what's below you. But it is required of the operator to make sure that there are no people in their path. So that's the first thing, that you have to make sure there's no people in your path. So you've got to figure out a way to do that. Some companies require the use of a spotter whenever there's anybody in the lift. The second thing they want you to pay attention to is when working around power lines. It's stated that the minimum distance that you can come from a power line is 10 feet. So you can never be closer than 10 feet to a power line. Now that might present some problems for us. We might be in situations where we've got to get closer than that. So we need to talk about those and work out a safe solution. Now, Wade and I were talking on Saturday about power lines and the hazards that are associated with electricity in general, but especially power lines. So it's kind of interesting that we were talking about that, and then that's one of the topics that we needed to bring up as far as it comes up with scissor lifts. I just wanted to bring it up because we're going to need to go into that into a little bit more depth and detail that we don't have time to do right now. So right now, I just want to make sure everybody's aware. Never bring a scissor lift, a man basket, closer than 10 feet to a power line. One of the things that can happen, you don't actually have to even touch the power line, because electricity can arc, or it can jump. It can jump from the power line to the scissor lift or to a worker in the scissor lift. Maybe you've got a piece of tool in your hand. It could jump to that tool and electrocute you. So electrocution can occur even if the scissor lift or the worker does not touch the power line. Just being close enough to it can cause that to happen. I don't know if Wade's on. Wade, are you on? Did you want to add anything about this, since you're kind of our electrical specialist?
Yeah, I'm on. No, that's just, if we have to get closer, you guys got to get it killed out and grounded. You have to call the power company and set that up. So our guys that bid these jobs and look at these jobs need to be aware of that.
Yeah, so always please look at where the power lines there are. Take a, look at Google Maps and find out where the power lines are going to be on our job sites, and make sure that if we have to go close to them, that we're making provisions for that. So Wade, in your experience, how long does it take to get a line powered down?
In Montana, it took us a while to get to reach them, but they come out the same day that I call them, or the day after I call them.
That's really good.
In California, it was, you had to give us 2 weeks notice before we had to send out an engineer and all this other crap to do load counts and everything else. But because there's a lot more to it. They got to do a lot of switching to backfeed lines and put their ground in and all that. So a lot more to it.
Yeah, so it's just, I think the right answer, Wade, is it depends, right? Depends what the power line is that you're doing and what it's feeding, and who, if it's feeding the whole neighborhood, or they can bring power from somewhere else. Yep. So sometimes it might be fairly quick and easy. Other times it might be, they might tell you, hey, there's no way we can power that down.
Well, so we had that in Montana. That one day we had over 100 degrees there, and they told us we couldn't have it out just because of that reason. The temperature.
They needed to be able to supply power to the neighborhood through that line. They couldn't power it down. Yeah, so be aware of that, guys. It's not just it might take some time. So as we're always saying, do your look ahead. If you are going to need to be near power lines and they're going to need to be powered down, you better get working on that. Find out how long that's going to take and what the process is going to be. We're going to call the local power company and find that out. And like Wade said, sometimes it takes a while to find out who the right contact is on that. So do your homework on that. Okay, this could be the result from working too closely to a power line. This incident here was, the driver actually was not injured on this one, but it was in a parking lot, and thankfully he didn't get hurt, but he did take out 5 other parked vehicles. And I don't think we would like to have that on our insurance. He's paying for this forklift and 5 other vehicles that he destroyed. So yeah, take the electricity serious, guys. Don't get within 10 feet, regardless. Okay, operating controls. As we mentioned, you have to know your operating controls, and that's going to be part of your hands-on training that you're going to do, or that you've already done. I know a lot of you guys are very familiar with this, and so a lot of this is just kind of rehash for you. Obviously, the controls on the left there for just like a little scissor lift. And then on the right, we've got, this might be like a JLG or something like that, a control panel for a JLG. And that's going to be what the controls look like in the basket. And then on the ground somewhere, there's going to be some controls as well that someone can come over and control it, or you can control it from the ground as well. I know some of the forklifts, they have the control panel that's actually on a little wire pendant, and you can actually move it around, control it. Some of them can be controlled as you're walking with them. But those ground control or those controls, you need to learn those. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to point out these ground controls, that we need to have a person on the ground who can understand these controls. And if needed, bring a person down, because their controls, either there could be two situations. A person's in the man basket at height and he's unresponsive, so he can't lower himself down. You need to be able to lower him down. Hopefully someone on the ground can lower him down. Another reason is we have had several instances, or at least I've been exposed to several instances, when the controls in the basket did not work, but the ground controls still did. And so someone on the ground able to operate those ground controls could at least get that person back down to safety. All right, does anybody have any questions or comments about Mewps, mobile elevated work platforms? I kind of went through it quickly. But I know that most of you are familiar with these, so I didn't want to do too much rehash, but I wanted to give you what the rules and regulations were necessary to become certified. Okay, any comments? Okay, Robert, get that certification so you can take your wife back up in those. I know Robert tells the story about taking his wife up in the top of a 110-foot lift just to try to show off the surrounding area to her, and scored some points there, I understand, right, Robert?
Yeah, but it was short-lived.
Oh, you need to figure something out then again. Flowers are good.
Yep.
All right, any comments? All right, guys. Don't do anything like what's shown in this photo here. Make sure you're doing it right and that you're doing it safe.